Hello everyone. So this is the HG6350 that I'll be using for the Chepaz chips competition. As you can see, it's already been stripped of its low profile PCIe bracket, and it's cooler here. This cooler I think is fairly anemic for what we're going to be doing with it, especially if I'm able to shove 1.5 volts through the core on ambient. So what I've done is I've gone out and I've bought this thing, which is an Arctic Accelero 4 Extreme. So yeah, this should be more than enough cooling for that little card. Now, the card itself is not on the supported list for this cooler, but it does have the same hole spacing. So this has 43mm hole spacing, this does as well. But there's just one problem I'm running into, and that's that, let's see here. You can see that that inductor right there, when I try and put this on the card, is going to end up interfering with the heat pipes. Let's see if I could show you that. So when I go and I bring this here, that inductor is not going to be happy because it's right up against the heat pipes, and so I'm not going to be able to tighten the cooler down. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that inductor and the capacitor right by it, and I'm going to flip that around to the other side of the PCB. So let's get on with doing that. There we go, starting to pull through. Now back to this side. Alright, now back to this side, this side, this side, and I think we're through. Just give it a bit of a wiggle here. I'm sorry, you can't see much there, can you? And there we go. There's an inductor out. So now we just got to do the same thing with this capacitor here. So unfortunately for me, it looks like this inductor doesn't have... Well, let's get you guys in manual focus mode here. This inductor doesn't have a square mounting pattern. It's rectangular. So that means that this inductor is only going to go on one way. And that way is crooked. So it's going to look like that. Well, it'll be like this, sort of at an angle. Well, that's fine. So I'm just gonna go like this. That seems to have worked pretty well. Now I hope I can get this side in. I did some practice actually on the X650 for doing this, for flipping the inductor around, and I had a bit of trouble with it, so we'll see how this goes here. I might have to bring that other side out farther. Yeah, that's not gonna fit. So let's pop that back up a little bit. Alright, I think I got it. So now I'll flip it over like this, and then we'll just sort of feed some solder in here. And here. Yeah, nice. So now this inductor is just going to drop right into place. As long as the card runs, it's fine. Alright, so now I just got to get this capacitor in somehow without burning my fingers. So, this little boy here, the red side goes towards the PCIe slot. So, when we put it in on this side, we're going to want to put it in... Oh, just poke the box there. So that it goes that way. And what I may end up doing is actually stealing... Well, I was considering stealing some of the caps from this thing. But I don't think they're the right size, so that sort of sucks. Because I want to add a bit more capacitance to this VRM. I will be going to Fry's Electronics to get some parts for the Volt mod that I'll be doing later. That inductor is still blistering hot. So I might be able to get some capacitors, although I doubt they'll be in this sort of form factor, and have the same sort of specs. And once I've finished this, of course, we'll do a couple tests on the card just to make sure it won't blow up. So I'll do like a short test on the output of the VRMs and stuff. Let's get that around this way and then heat from this side, I think. Yeah, I need something better to poke that with. Let's get these side snips. There we go, that's better. I mean, ideally that would be down on the PCB, but really, I could care less at this point. You know what? I think that's good enough. Wow, that's still really hot. Alrighty, so here's the fun part, where we see if I've done anything terribly wrong. So I've got the multimeter here, it's in resistance mode, so... There we go. That's a pretty low resistance right there. So what we're gonna do... Oh, of course, now the capacitor's here. But I guess what I could do... Yeah, these should be the same. So I can just check here that I've not shorted the GPU output. Yeah, 13 ohms is the resistance of the core. So that seems normal. So we've not shorted, like, the capacitor hasn't shorted anything. And we could also check over here the capacity or the output of the memory VRM. So that one is 67 ohms ish. And what was I gonna do? So let's see here. So this is probably, yeah. So that side is vCore for memory. So then this must be ground. And so if we check ground against ground, we should expect to see very little resistance. And then ground against this, and we should see greater resistance through the core plus some. Yeah, that seems right. What's another thing? Oh yeah. So now we're gonna check the voltage on the resistance to ground on the feedback pins, as well as to vCore. I forget exactly which pins those are. So let me just take a look at this. Let me bring you guys in close. So we're gonna go real close. All right. Which one is the voltage controller? I think it is this boy right here. So this boy, this UP something or other that you guys can probably read right now, but I can't. I have a data sheet for it, not on hand currently, but we're gonna find one of the pins on this thing that has a resistance to both vCore and ground. So let's go ahead and do that. So pin 1, 1.1 mega ohms to ground. That probably isn't connected to anything. That's not a feedback circuit either. Pin 2. Pin 3. I thought I was reading 0 on that. Hello? Oh, maybe it's... Oh, Is there an auto range on this thing? That's continuity. No, that's showing diode drop. This meter doesn't have auto ranging. Oh, that's annoying. Alright. You know what? Let's just switch it to kilo ohm range because I know I'm looking for a resistance in that range approximately, because that's what the voltage controller says. The spec sheet says. So that's 0 ohms. So that's ground. That's nothing. Let's try this pin here. That read something for a bit, but then it was gone. Next, that could be a candidate. Next. Okay. So let's kick it up a notch. Maybe that is like a really high resistance feedback circuit. No, it just looks like some capacitance on that line. Next. 8.85 kilo ohms right there. That's I think that's pin 6 because it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that how that goes? Don't know. Let's check the next one just to be sure. Nothing and nothing. So let's check if that pin 6 has connection to vCore. So now there's this thing I do where I sort of go on one side of the card here, sort of hold this, and then take pin 6. Hello? 8.84 to vCore. Let's get that again. 8.84 to vCore and 8.86 to ground. So that makes my math rather easy then, because there's 8.86 to vCore and 8.84 to ground. That's fantastic. It's a just 1-to-1 ratio, which is the same thing I worked on in there with the X1650. So this should be rather easy. Now, never run a thing without the GPU heatsink here, but seems to have booted. And hey, we have BIOS screen on this terrible monitor that apparently, ouch. Put that bad boy in one of the screw holes, and we're gonna stick that on the inductor, and we're gonna hit run. Well, we're gonna turn the power supply on and then hit run, and we'll see what voltage it gives us here. I'm expecting 1 volt, but you never know, because in software it reports 1 volt. Alright, so I've done the calculations with regards to what sort of resistances we need here, and I've gone out and I've bought these potentiometers. This is the card itself. As you can see, I've gone ahead and drawn all over it just to make it a bit more interesting. You can see I've put some blue there just to make it look a bit nicer. Same thing with the edge of the PCB. There's some blue Sharpie on that. As you can see, it's been quite heavily modified. So I think what we'll do is we'll start with I guess over here. So this right here, these two switches are the enable and disable for the memory and the vCore voltage mod. So I think this way is disabled and that way is enabled. And these are just soldered together, and these are actually soldered to the ground plane of the card in multiple places. So right over here, they're soldered to the ground plane, and then on the back, I think they're soldered as well, as you can see. And then what these basically do, here's my very fancy schematic. These are these switches right here. So this is the normal feedback circuitry from, this is the feedback pin, this is VMEM and ground, and VCore and ground. And then what I'm doing is I'm essentially lowering the resistance to the ground to trick the card into thinking that its voltage is lower than it actually is, so it boosts the voltage up. So that's what this is doing. This resistor right here is basically a limiting resistor, and that limits the maximum voltage I can get. So for this one, it's 33 and 17.7K. I actually ended up making those resistance values smaller because I needed more voltage range. We'll talk about that later. The potentiometers are 100, were just 100K, and that allowed me to get a good voltage with the mod enabled, which is like 1.1 volts or something for the other ones. And then I didn't actually have a multimeter because I was bringing this to school, so while I was still in my room, what I did is I characterized the voltage curves for both VCore and VMM, and that changed obviously when I changed resistance. So this is the modified VCore one. I think it goes all the way up to 1.87 volts. Stock runs the card runs stock at 1 volt, so I'm pushing quite a lot more voltage than is normal, I guess, into it. Anyway, so those are the switches there. You'll see I've added a capacitor right here on, I think, what is the memory VRM. So yeah, this is the stock memory VRM. This is a fan header, which I had to sort of modify and cut away to get my cooler to fit there. That cooler is now on my RX 570. It's a Accelero Extreme 2, and it was very good at keeping this thing cool until the thermal density just got like ridiculously high. So you can see that I've got these little multi-layer ceramics just bodged onto there. Those were harvested from another card, actually. You can't see them under here because I got tape. But those were harvested from I think it was a X1650 that I had, and I actually ripped the core off of that one because it died. It wouldn't post, and I sort of chipped it in the corner. But that was pretty cool. That's what I did my practice voltage modding on. And then behind the core, you can see here, these are, I forget which ones are memory and such, but I think these three are core. These three right here, and then this one's memory. Those are just, again, some more multi-layer ceramics I took off the other one and bodged on. I don't know if they're the right voltage rating or if they have like a decent capacity or anything, but figured it couldn't hurt. One time, I'm not sure if you can see, but in there's some pads that don't have any multi-layer ceramics on them. What happened was I tried to add another one on top of the original one, and what ended up happening is I somehow shorted out the VRM on the other side. So what I did is I took a AA battery and I soldered two leads one to both sides of the capacitor, and I just soldered two leads to that and put a AA across it, and that burned the cap up. So then the short was gone, and then I just flicked the cap off the board. So that was sort of sketchy, having suddenly there would be a short on the output side of the VCore VRM halfway around. It was sort of concerning, but I burned it out and it seemed to work fine afterwards. These are the potentiometers here. They're a bit wonky in that they have a bit of a weird curve, and you have to turn them this way to increase the voltage, which is just sort of an artifact of how I wired them up. But it allowed me to get a more even curve, I guess, in terms of resistance and stuff. Let's put it back into autofocus. There we go. And then on the back side, you could obviously see the limiting resistors right here. And that's about it for the hardware side of things, I guess. Here's my score sheet for 3D Mark 06. My target score to beat was 49.37, which was the guy in front of me. I ended up pretty lower than that. I ended up at 47.61. That was with a GPU frequency of 1050 and a memory frequency of 1040, which is as stable as I can get it. I also killed Explorer.exe. That was at 1.42 volts. I think I just sort of got bored of this because I was so behind the other guy in terms of everything else, and there was no way I was getting it higher. So it also crashed a bunch, which wasn't fun. This was by far my least favorite benchmark out of them, 3D Mark 06, just because it ran so slow. I don't know. It was alright. Next is 3D Mark Skydiver. I don't have a target, I don't think, on here, but I ended up pushing, you can see, I set like 1.75, 1.8 volts in some of these tests. Overall, my final score that I was able to get was 1539, I think, is my highest. Something like that. And that was with a core clock of 1315 megahertz, a memory clock of 1037 megahertz with 1.6 volts set, which was pretty good. I should also note that the memory overclocking didn't seem to be impacted at all by memory voltage, which was sort of weird, but I guess the memory IC that I have just doesn't scale, which is sort of unfortunate. Anyways, Skydiver was a bit weird in that my fastest runs, there would always be a bunch of artifacting and stuff, and it was just a question of whether I could get through. I was also sort of starting to run up to the thermal limits of the card. When I had it back at like 1.5 volts, it was sitting around maybe 40 or 50 C under full load. But as soon as I got up to like the 1.75 volt range, the amount of current it was drawing and just the thermal density of such a small die meant that this thing was hitting like 90 to 100 degrees C. And when you're pushing 1.75 volts through a card like that, that's not the best for it, and it doesn't tend to like you for it. So that's where stability became a concern. I'm sure I could definitely get this thing to clock higher on some sort of exotic cooling, but currently I don't have any water cooling or anything like that. I've never played with liquid nitrogen or dry ice, which would be fun to do, especially with this card, because it still works. I haven't killed it yet. Next is Unison Heaven, and let's see what the highest score I got here was. I got, it looks like a 316.89 is the maximum I got, and that was at 1125 megahertz core clock, 1037 megahertz memory, and 1.59 volts set. And yeah, I guess there's not much to say about that. The next one is 3D Mark 11 here, and this was another one that I didn't necessarily like. The 3D Mark applications are like not fun to deal with, really. Like if they crash, sometimes they break, and then you have to reinstall them. It's like, I don't know. It was sort of weird. So I think my maximum score here, it's 1073 is what I have written down. With 1.65 volt set, I was running at 1240 core and 1037 memory. Yeah, that's basically about it. This was one of the harder tests to pass just because it was so long, and one of the tests specifically was like really memory intensive, and it would always crash there. It was just sort of fighting stability. It also didn't help that at the time my rig was basically, I was using my daily rig for this, which was Pentium G4560 and a single stick of I think Micron B die, which was like absolutely terrible. I had it at 2400, I think 10, 13, 13 something. So yeah, it was not the strongest system. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't win, or I didn't get close to the top positions in 3D Mark, is because I had a terrible CPU score for the CPU tests, especially in 3D Mark 11. Like the guy ahead of me had a much lower clocked graphics card and lower graphics score, but he had a 7700K, so that helped him out a lot. Nowadays I have a 3600 and 16 gigs of Samsung B die, so that would help. However, the competition's over, and it's a bit too late for that. But still, I think that was pretty good. I think I was in like the top 5 overall for a good while. But then, of course, at the end, everybody who had done like exotic cooling posted all their stuff in the last minute. And this one guy who won, like, I think it was either liquid nitrogen or dry ice that he put it on. I saw a couple other people in there had like tons of capacitors all over it. Yeah, it was pretty fun. So I guess that's about it. And you might see some more of this in the future if I ever decide to do exotic cooling. In fact, if I ever do liquid nitrogen or dry ice, this will probably be the first card I take on that, because it's sort of a known platform for me, or like a known, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any other GPUs to take on LM2 except for my RX 570, which I've beaten somebody else's record in Eugene Heaven with that, but I didn't get to save the score because my system blue screens right after that. Right after I got it. Which sort of sucks. And now I can't seem to get it back up to there. But anyways, this has basically been that. And I hope you guys like the video. As you can see, my desk is very messy. I've got a lot of projects going on, specifically with this little linear actuator there. That might give you guys some clues. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.